Hi, welcome to our channel Programming of Mind, where we accelerate your knowledge with concise, from high-value book summaries. Let's begin. The Ego and the Path to Liberation, Realizing the False Self. Ravi's inner journey continued, and with each passing day, he felt his understanding of the deeper truths of life grow clearer. The more he meditated, the more he began to see the nature of the ego, the false self that had shaped his perception of the world for so long. The ego was not just a set of beliefs or ideas. It was a powerful force that had controlled his thoughts, emotions, and actions. It had shaped his desires, his fears, and even his sense of identity. However, the deeper Ravi delved into his spiritual practice, the more he understood that true liberation could only come when he learned to transcend the ego. The ego was an illusion, a temporary identification with the body, mind, and the personal story that one carried. But the truth, Ravi realized, was far greater than this limited self-concept. The truth was the eternal self, the soul that transcended all dualities and attachments. The illusion of the ego, a personal struggle. One day, after an intense meditation session, Ravi found himself sitting alone under a tree near the river that ran through the ashram. He had been meditating for several hours, seeking the stillness and peace that he had come to cherish. However, today was different. As he closed his eyes, he became acutely aware of the internal chatter that constantly filled his mind. Thoughts about his past, his accomplishments, and even his fears about the future were all vying for his attention. Ravi had always prided himself on his ability to meditate and control his thoughts, but today, the thoughts seemed louder than ever. He found himself struggling to silence them, to reach the same state of deep awareness that he had often experienced. The more he tried, the more the thoughts seemed to multiply, as if they were mocking his attempts to achieve peace. He opened his eyes and looked around, frustrated. The beautiful river flowed calmly beside him. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, and the birds sang their melodies. Yet, despite the outward tranquility, his inner world was far from peaceful. Suddenly, a memory came to him. Something Guruji had once said to him, "Ravi, the ego is like a cloud that covers the sun. It seems solid and real, but it is empty and transient. If you try to control it, it will only grow stronger. Instead, let it pass by, and the light of your true self will shine through." At that moment, Ravi realized that the struggle he was facing in meditation was not the result of a lack of effort or discipline. It was the result of his attachment to his ego, the very thing that created his sense of separation from the world and from his true self. The more he clung to the idea of Ravi as a separate individual with unique desires, goals, and fears, the more he strengthened the illusion of the ego. But Ravi now understood that the ego was not something to be eradicated or fought against. It was something to be seen for what it was, an illusion that would naturally dissolve as he deepened his awareness. The path to liberation, letting go of the false self. Ravi's realization about the nature of the ego marked a turning point in his spiritual practice. He understood that the ego was not an enemy to be defeated, but a false identification that had to be transcended. The true self, the Atman, the unchanging awareness behind all thoughts and experiences, was already present within him. All he needed to do was let go of the illusion of separation and allow the light of his true self to shine through. Guruji had often spoken about the importance of non-attachment. The need to let go of the mental and emotional attachments that bind us to the false self. This non-attachment was not about renouncing the world, but about seeing the world through the eyes of the true self, without being caught up in the drama of the ego. One evening, after an intense meditation retreat at the ashram, Guruji spoke to Ravi about the ego in a way that Ravi had never heard before. The evening was cool, and the stars were beginning to appear in the sky. Guruji and Ravi sat on a stone bench outside the temple, looking at the moon rising over the distant hills. The ego, Guruji began, is like a shadow. It only exists because we give it attention. When we stop identifying with it, it fades away. But this process is not about trying to force the ego to disappear. It's about recognizing that the ego is not who you truly are. You're the consciousness that watches the ego rise and fall, just as you watch the clouds in the sky. Ravi listened intently, feeling the truth of Guruji's words resonate deeply within him. He realized that the more he identified with his thoughts, his desires, and his emotions, the more he strengthened the ego. But when he simply observed these things without attachment, the ego had no power over him. It was at this moment that Ravi experienced something profound. As Guruji continued to speak, Ravi felt a wave of freedom wash over him, as if a weight had been lifted from his chest. The constant struggle to control his thoughts, to shape his identity, had fallen away. For the first time, he experienced what it was like to simply be a pure, unchanging awareness, watching the thoughts and emotions arise and dissolve like clouds in the sky. The ego's last stand, facing the fear of death. As Ravi's understanding of the ego deepened, he began to confront one of the most challenging aspects of the spiritual journey, the fear of death. The ego, after all, was not only concerned with the present moment, but with the preservation of the individual self. Death, in the eyes of the ego, was the ultimate threat. If Ravi's identity was bound to the body, the mind, and the experiences of his life, then death would mean the end of everything he knew. But as Ravi continued to meditate and deepen his awareness, he realized that the fear of death was, in fact, another manifestation of the ego. The true self, the eternal awareness, could never die. It was beyond birth and death, beyond time and space. It was the essence of life itself, ever-present and unchanging. One evening, as Ravi sat in meditation, this fear arose within him. He suddenly felt a deep sense of panic. What if everything he had worked for, everything he had come to understand, was just an illusion? What if the body, the mind, and the ego were all he truly was? And what would happen when death came? Would he cease to exist forever? For the first time, Ravi faced the fear of death head-on, without turning away. He sat with the fear, allowed it to rise within him, and watched it without judgment. As he observed the fear, something extraordinary happened. The fear began to lose its grip on him. He realized that the fear of death was not real. It was simply a mental construct, a belief created by the ego to protect itself. Ravi's awareness shifted in that moment. He saw that death was simply the end of the physical form, but not the end of who he truly was. He was the eternal consciousness, the witness to all things, including birth and death. The fear dissolved, and in its place came a profound sense of peace. Ravi realized that he was already free from the fear of death, free from the limitations of the ego, and free from the illusion of separation. The final liberation, realizing the self beyond the body and mind. As Ravi's understanding of the ego and the nature of the self deepened, he began to experience a shift in consciousness. It was as if he was no longer bound by the limitations of the physical body or the mental constructs that had once defined his identity. He began to see the body as simply a vehicle for his true self, the eternal consciousness that was beyond birth, death, and form. Guruji once said to him, "Ravi, the body is a temple, but the self is the divine that resides within. Do not confuse the temple with the deity. The body is temporary, but the self is eternal." Ravi reflected on these words as he sat in meditation one morning, the early light of dawn casting a soft glow over the landscape. As he focused his attention inward, he felt a deep sense of liberation. He realized that he was not the body, nor was he the mind. He was the pure awareness that witnessed both the body and the mind. With this realization, the last remnants of the ego dissolved. Ravi felt a profound sense of oneness with everything around him. He was no longer Ravi, the individual. He was the eternal self, the consciousness that pervaded all of existence. Thank you for listening, and please like the video and subscribe for more great upcoming content that will put you in top 1% people in the world.